Hi, guys. Thank you for surviving to the late afternoon. It's impressive. Um, Today I'm going to talk about the world's first super commodity, as we're calling it. My name is Ryan Condron. I got into mining at the end of 2012. A good friend of mine told me about Bitcoin. A very good friend now, thankfully. But before I get more into my story, I want to tell you about a guy named Brad. Now, Brad was a senior commodities trader at a company called Exacor, and Exacor had done incredibly well for itself. In fact, it had done so well that they purchased an old warehouse in the old docks district of the city, right on the river. And they had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river and a tremendous view of the city skyline. Now, Brad wasn't in a great mood because they had implemented new software recently that was messing up some of their commodities trades. And that was bothering him quite significantly. And this morning was no different. And when his phone rang and his secretary was on the other end, and he answered as polite as he could and said, "Yeah, what do you want?" And the secretary said, "Well, excuse me, sir, you have a delivery in the lobby for you that you need to come sign for." "Just have them sign and leave it in the lobby." "I'm sorry, sir, that's not going to work like that. I think you need to come here." So Brad slams down the handset and he storms out of his office and across the beautifully renovated warehouse and into the atrium, where he notices two things. One, the beautiful floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river and the city beyond. And two, the large amount of barges sitting on the river, brimming to the top with coal. At this point, this was an odd view for Brad. He wasn't used to seeing that, but hey, it's a river. They can do whatever they want with it. He composes himself just in time to see a strange fellow with a broad smile from ear to ear approach him and say, "You must be Brad." "Well, yes, I am. What can I do for you?" "Well, you can tell me where to unload the shipment." Brad tries to compose himself. He is not having a good morning. "What on earth are you talking about?" "Well, you are Brad, aren't you? And this is Exacor. And this is Pier 53. Well, I've got your 28 tons of black gold here to deliver." It's at this moment that Brad realized that he made a very, very serious error. And he starts to recollect all the phone calls from the back office over the past couple days where people were frantically trying to get him to confirm one of the trades, and he didn't want to review it or look over it. And in his mind, just push it through. And now he was sitting on 56,000 pounds of coal that he had to figure out what to do with because he bought a commodity and took delivery of it. Now, stories like this one have become folklore in the commodities world. Whether they're true or false, I am not sure, but we hear all sorts of stories of secretaries accidentally taking delivery of thousands of pounds of pork loin, or a novice trader receiving truckloads of corn. And what these stories all underline is the extreme disconnect between the markets and the product. That just because you're trading a product doesn't mean you actually want the product or want to deal with the product. But there is a product to be dealt with. Now, I got into mining in the end of 2012. Okay? A lot of people said that was early. At the time, I thought I was incredibly late. I had already missed one of the halvenings, and the block sizes were much smaller than what everyone else was talking about. So my buddy put in his pre-order for Butterfly Labs units, and we started buying GPUs and putting them in our garage or wherever we could place them. So throughout 2013, we began mining. We started realizing that there were other coins to mine, and my buddy came to me one day and said, "Hey, I've been solo mining Litecoin. I mined 5,000 Litecoin yesterday. We should switch over to that." And we started realizing that we could hit these profitability targets, and we were actually ROIing on our equipment in 10 to 20 days, because what we'd do is we'd mine one of these altcoins and then just sell them into Bitcoin or sell them on the exchange from there. 2013 was a fun year, and it was a lot of learning. Now as 2014 rolled around and the ASICs started coming out from Bitmain and we started buying some of those, my buddy had filled his garage fully now, and he was cutting holes in the ceiling to vent the air. And I would go into the addition of my house at one point. It was 130 degrees or 55 degrees Celsius. All the windows open and the fans blowing and the side yard sounding like a jet engine. I realize now, thinking back at it, how strange that must have been to my neighbors, wondering what I was doing. And mining originally started out as a hobby. And now we've moved from hobby to an industry. And now we're moving from industry into core infrastructure. Because as we started realizing in 2014, we saw this flight path that is, if Bitcoin was truly to be a world anchor of wealth, then it was going to have to scale, and mining was going to have to scale with it. Now, another thing happened in 2014 that I thought was really interesting is we started realizing that, well, governments are going to take an interest in this. And if they can't control the distribution of the minting of the coins itself, or the distribution of the coins, or the minting of the coins themselves, they are going to control other aspects of it, like the on-ramp and the off-ramp. And this was when I was first introduced to two acronyms that we know very, very well in the space, and at the time I had no clue what they were: KYC and AML. Know your customer and anti-money laundering. They started to bring that into all the exchanges. And eventually that moved into the hardware manufacturers. You had to do KYC, AML checks just to buy the hardware. And now this industry and this process that used to be free, that anyone with electricity and a GPU or a CPU or even earlier could acquire this asset, now all of a sudden it didn't seem so free. And we started to see what we once considered decentralized and free to start being infringed upon. And now all of a sudden we see these toasters being distributed all over the world in tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of devices at a time, being shoved into warehouses and data centers all over the world. And we started seeing more and more centralization in the space. And now this is when I started to write a paper in 2017 going, there has to be a better way. There has to be a way to decentralize this. And I heard at the time a lot of people mixing up two words. They were mixing up the word distributed and decentralized. They are two very, very different things. And this is why I wrote a paper called The Decentralization of Control, because the reality is decentralization has everything to do with control. And just because you have 100,000 devices in a single facility doesn't mean it has to be controlled by a single person or a single facility. And this was the start of the Lumerin protocol. And this is what I'm here to show you today. The Lumerin protocol was the first attempt at an idea of how do we decentralize control of the hash power, regardless of where in the world it is. How do we sell off the control on an open market? And I'm going to step you through a very simple pattern for this, okay? Where a seller of hash power anywhere in the world can sell it on an open smart contract, and a buyer anywhere in the world can purchase that contract and receive the shipment in real time, instantly, anonymously, trustlessly, in a decentralized way. You're actually receiving the product that you bought on a market, and it will save Brad a heart attack. So this is the simple pattern. You have a source and you have a destination, and it's going through a smart contract. Now, the smart contract can be whatever you want the rules to be. We're not dictating that as a protocol. We're simply providing the proxy system that's opening and closing sockets based on the rules found in that contract. Now, let's dive into this a little more of how it applies to hash power. Now, when I was building out the screens for hash power, I couldn't really find a good icon to represent hash power. I could use a hash mark, but I felt like that was just overused and stupid, so I went with dinosaurs. So anywhere you see a dinosaur, think hash power. All right, so what we have here is sellers, being a mining farm, will run a Lumerin node, which is simply a proxy system. They will point their miners through that proxy, and it will be pushed onto whatever their default mining pool is. The miner can then post a smart contract to the open decentralized marketplace for a certain amount of hash power over a certain amount of time. Now, if the buyer comes along and sees a contract they wish to purchase inside the Lumerin interface, they can click purchase. And the moment they execute that purchase and it goes on chain, The seller picks up that order, the proxy peels off that amount of hash power, and streams its little dinosaurs over to the buyer. Pretty easy. Now let's expand it a little bit more. What does the buyer actually receive? Well, they're receiving dinosaurs, i.e. hash rate, and the buyer can do whatever they want with that. They can mine Bitcoin Cash or Tiger Coin or some other Sha coin if they will. If it's a Litecoin marketplace, they can mine Litecoin. It doesn't matter necessarily what algorithm it is. It's really the pattern that we're focused on. And the buyer is actually buying a real product. And the buyer gets to stream that product onto the pool, and the pool gets to do whatever they want with it, most likely mine Bitcoin in this example, and then pay the buyer real Bitcoin. Now, what does this expand to? Well, what we foresee is sellers, meaning miners, posting their contracts on the marketplace, and the buyers buying the contracts. And the vision that we're having is that sellers or miners are really a utility. They're really moving their hash power, they're really creating hash power from electricity. So they're not burning electricity to get coins, but they're translating electricity into another commodity. And if we really treat hash power as a commodity, and in this case, we call it a super commodity because it's instantly delivered, can be anonymous, and fully decentralized. So this is what the current Lumerin wallet interface looks like. This is the version 1 of the wallet. We're actually releasing it today on mainnet. We have launched it on Arbitrum 1. It's cheaper and faster than Ethereum mainnet, but it can really be deployed on any EVM system. It's available at lumerin.io, and from there you can mine with it. Now, why does this matter? Like, why am I up here talking about it, and why should you even care? That's the real question. Why does any of this actually matter? The reality is the majority of us were born into an ecosystem, a banking financial ecosystem that we did not choose. The majority of people in this room, and probably even watching on streaming, had very little to do, if anything, with the current financial ecosystem or governmental oversight that we're currently experiencing, right? But we have a chance now. We have a chance with Bitcoin. We have a chance with these peer-to-peer currency systems to rebuild, to build something better, to build something free, to build something permissionless. And that's such an amazing chance right now. We haven't seen that before in the history of the world, to be able to globally rethink how we do finances, how we do money. Normally, money and finances are so held tightly by a government, and they still do, and they're still trying. Bitcoin is a chance. Now, if I took you back 100 years, okay, and we went back to 1923, and I pointed at an airplane. Now, commercial flight was just really getting started. The first commercial flight really happened in like 1914, okay? So that was the start of an industry. 10 years into that industry, 1923, okay? Does that sound familiar? 10 years into an industry. And we look at commercial flight. And we went back to 1923, and I say, look, I know it doesn't look like anything right now. This is commercial flight. People are getting on airplanes, and they're going from here to here, like yada, yada, okay? Not very impressive. But let me take you 100 years into the future. In 2023, let me explain to you what airplanes are going to look like. Let me explain to you what flight is going to look like. Let me explain to you what TSA security is going to look like. Let me tell you that there are going to be people that live the majority of their life on these things, going from conference to conference to conference around the world just to talk to people that they actually live in the same city with. Some of us are living that reality. If I explained to you in 1923 what the airline industry was going to look like in 100 years, you probably would have thought I was crazy. Because it doesn't make sense. Like, you can't necessarily see it extrapolated like that. And if we try to do the same thing with Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining, it's really hard. But I can say a couple things about the future of Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. You know, as we start moving into more scalable ecosystems, as we start realizing that we're still trying to pack hundreds of thousands of these little consumer form factor toasters into warehouses all around the world, and maybe we'll move that into large blades of liquid immersion chips, you know, and maybe governments will get involved in mining, and now all of a sudden we have power producers have load response systems that are actually counterbalanced just intrinsically by hash power. And they're either selling to the grid or they're selling to a network, and this is all just baked in, right? And 100 years from now, this is not even a second thought. Technologically, that makes sense. But why is this important? And the reality is why it's important is right now if I try to load Cash App or Venmo on my phone and I try to send my friend $5,000, it's going to stop me. If I try to wire someone money, the bank's going to stop me. If I try to actually own my own wealth, if I actually try to control my own finances, if I try to do something without government intervention, I will be stopped. And yet a couple years ago, we saw a $1 billion transaction on Bitcoin take place that was anonymous to the general public. I'm sure someone knows what it is. But it was settled in 40 minutes and cost about $700 in fees. And to my knowledge, no government was involved, and to my knowledge, no bank was involved. That's true freedom. And that's true greatness in a financial system. And I have 3 boys, and one day I want their kids to experience freedom in finances. I want them to experience freedom in wealth. And I want them to be able to mine. And I want them to be able to purchase hash power and mine Bitcoin and process transactions and take place in an ecosystem that is truly peer-to-peer and not set forth for them. I don't want them to be interacting in a system that was built for them and that they just have to comply to. I want them to disrupt things. And that's where I think Lumerin is incredibly important, is it's really providing hash power back to people. It's taking a form factor of centralization, 100,000 devices in a single facility, because that's optimized. We're not going to get away from that. Anywhere in the world you have cheap electricity, favorable government, and stable infrastructure, you're going to have a hotbed and centralization of mining. But we can push that hash power onto a global hash power grid, and we can sell it on an open market. And now someone in South Africa can purchase hash power and mine with it. Someone in Siberia, someone in Kenya can sell their hash power. And we don't have to be confined to the localized grids of electricity, but we can now translate into a super commodity. Thank you.
Ryan, how old are your boys?
8, 10, and 12.
Okay, so you know I like to throw curveballs, right?
Let's do it.
It's devil's advocate thing. Do they play kick the can? Your kids?
Occasionally, yes.
Yeah? So the metaphor that I'm using here is kicking the can down the road, meaning that we've been in a cat and mouse game with cryptography and with software, with regulators, right, and hackers for a long time. The most recent challenge that we have is developers being made responsible for the code it is that they deployed, Tornado Cash. And so my question is are we not recreating the same, way of trying to get around KYC, AML, and government regulation that at some point deploying the Lumerin protocol could make you liable because that's the next point at which it is that they can turn off the non-KYC acquisition of a non-state currency?
Yes. I'll often say in interviews, he who has the most guns wins. And true decentralization is when they don't know who to point the gun at. So Satoshi was smart in staying anonymous. And anyone that launches a network, anyone that launches the ability to acquire and control wealth in a free manner will have the gun pointed at them eventually. But the reality is we have the opportunity for a financial revolution. We have the opportunity to back Bitcoin and Ethereum and these other protocols. And it's our job right now to make sure that they stay free, they stay open, and they stay decentralized.
Okay. And so then my next question would be, who has another question? There's got to be somebody out there. We go, in the corner.
That was an awesome presentation. Is Lumerin decentralized currently? If so, how do you make money from it? And how does it, get updated in the future? I mean, it looks like an arbitrage opportunity right now for investors, but in 2 years, it may disappear the same way Bitcoin's price was a different price in Japan than in other markets.
Yeah. So we built the protocol and the pattern inside of the routing proxy. We've launched the initial marketplace, but we are, so we do have fees on the marketplace, and that's how we get money back for the time in development. Our goal in our business model is not to be the end-all and be-all of marketplaces. We really believe that partnering with other companies in the space to run the marketplace, to iterate on the marketplace, turn it into a real-time commodities exchange, because we want to move on to the next thing. We want to start doing modules for an AI compute marketplace. We want to do modules for peer-to-peer communications. There's a lot of things you can do with brokering data streams through smart contracts that gets really, really cool. Hashpower was the default one for me because that was the world I knew. But with the Lumerin protocol, we have so many other things that we want to build and continue exploring. The hashpower marketplace is really the first stop, and we really think it's a great shot at keeping the Bitcoin mining ecosystem decentralized.
Another question? So you're making you're pushing the narrative of, again, power to the people, and of course I support that. But I'm starting, with my age and experience in this space, to question whether or not our market is not necessarily incumbent institutions and incumbent governments, and is it not in our interest to push this out at a larger scale than just the individual? In other words, we have all of the jurisdictions which are becoming favorable to crypto, and people are trying to establish mining operations in these jurisdictions and capture stranded energy and everything. Would it not be of interest to the network for having small nation states participating in a hash power marketplace and not only individuals?
Absolutely. We're starting to see nation states getting into mining, right? But just because certain parts of the world have access to mining hardware, does that mean other parts of the world that don't have access to that hardware, they can't participate, right? So at fruition, if Bitcoin truly is going to be a free, decentralized ecosystem, we have to decouple where the hardware is versus where the people controlling the hardware is and where the people are mining at. That's really decoupling distributed versus decentralized, and that's the whole premise of decentralization of control, is we want to be able to bring more decision makers in the space. Right now there's 4 pools that mine over 90% of the blocks. Okay, 2 of the pools mine about 65 to 70% of the blocks. Now, why is that the case? Well, because you have 1 to 2 decision makers will have control of 20 to 30 exahashes, and they point it towards one pool. Now, if they put that 20 to 30 exahashes up for sale in an open market, now they might get more profitability because they're selling the hash rate, but now it's going to be hundreds of thousands of users that might purchase that hash rate and point it to different pools. They could point it to the same pool because the economics are better, but it's giving the option of greater democratization. It's giving the option for more decision makers in the space, and that's decentralized.
So as being a miner and having miner colleagues, do you see this desire to move in that direction in the mining industry, or do you see people wanting to hold on to their pool and their hash power?
No, miners are a profit-driven animal at the end of the day, right? We showed that early on with building profit-switching pools, that if a network all of a sudden became more profitable, we would literally just jump from network to network to network just because the economics were better. Now, what's happening right now is because you have more publicly traded miners and you have larger stakes at play with the different governments getting involved and kind of waking up to this, is now we have a compliance issue, and we have regulation, and we have KYC, and we have AML, and we have a lot of compliance concerns in the space. So that's, I would say, the current hurdle is how do we treat hash power truly as a commodity that can be sold, Or do we have to say, oh, hashpower needs to be fenced in, and anyone that controls hashpower has to go through KYC AML? And then we have to really ask ourselves, is this a system that we really want to partake in? Because is that really the ethos? Is that really the belief that we have in freedom of finance and freedom of currency, that we're going to gatekeep anyone that can actually acquire this currency? I don't believe in that.
Kick the can.
Yeah, well, that's my kid's problem, right? Or their kid's problem. But if I can do something about it now, I will.
Thank you so much for
guys.
presenting this to us today. Lumerin, Lumerin.io if you want to download the wallet and check it out and get more information.